Final Fantasy X holds an incredibly dear place in my heart, not just among RPGs or video games as a whole, but as a story, and is one of my all-time favorite pieces of media. The game surpasses any accusations of simple nostalgia and has stood up to the test of time. The themes and characters in-game deal with heavy concepts such as loss and how to deal with grief, the randomness of losing loved ones in natural disasters, the self-sacrifice demanded of a dogmatic religion, the hope and peace that an altruistic person can bring to those in mourning, coming to terms with one's own existence and finding purpose regardless, nurturing love in a world of near-perpetual loss. The tragedy of the powers that be co-opting benevolence in pursuit of optics over tangible solutions. And the role of entertainment and how a simple escape, like sports, can provide an invaluable respite from the harshness of reality.
It's showtime, girls.
A few quick things before we start. I have been married for 8 years to a woman born and raised in Japan. Something I only mention because I want to give context to a game that was much more loved in its time and country of origin. Final Fantasy X-2 is certainly still divisive in Japan, yet it was nonetheless more highly regarded over there. I really want to avoid this analysis devolving into, haha, my dress-up, cringy, unless I feel the game really does merit that. I am setting out to discover what seemed to resonate with Japanese audiences more than American ones. Both countries love Final Fantasy games, and while the dialogue of Final Fantasy X-2 is considered painful in both languages,
Youch!
The Japanese video game magazine Famitsu polled Japanese consumers, and even 3 years after its release, Final Fantasy X-2 was considered the 32nd best game of all time. While games have evolved, and that list has changed over the last 15 years, what hasn't changed is that Japanese audiences, while divided, still hold this game in higher esteem. Where possible, I will be consulting my wife, Japanese media, and the online discourse surrounding the 20th anniversary of this game in hopes of finding new perspectives that may have been lost on 13-year-old me and my American compatriots.
I don't like your plan. It sucks.
Show's over!
Okay, not to start off too nitpicky, but we know that that's not Yuna, but the audience certainly doesn't. I mean, they were clapping and cheering as she was singing. And if you were watching your favorite performer live on stage and two chicks ran up to her with swords and knives and started swinging at her, would you stand in the background still cheering? I don't know, it's kind of weird to me, but we'll keep going.
Don't touch me.
In the first game, Yuna is a tragic martyr, filled with nothing but love for her people and selflessness for the cause that she believes will save them. It would of course be tonal whiplash if she became Tracer from Overwatch in a hot pair of jean booty shorts.
Wouldn't everyone be surprised?
Yeah.
However, this is exactly what happens, for better or for worse. But this is a great time to dive into what is probably the first turnoff audiences may have experienced, the concept of the gyaruge, or Japanese for girls game. Kind of. Not really, but also yes? Let me explain. So it's not completely clear-cut. The line between gyaruge and romance game is blurred, and while my wife and I tried to find a hard and fast answer for hours on both the Japanese and American sides of the internet, a concrete definition still eluded us. But here's the best way I can describe it. Japan likes to shorten things into 3 or 4 syllables for reasons I don't care to explore right now, but gyaruge is a condensing of the words gyaru and game. However, this does not explicitly mean that the game is only intended for gyaru subculture, or even girls as a general demographic, but is a subset of, at its core, girl-centric games with female characters and some degree of accessorizing and fashion-oriented gameplay elements. Gyaruge can be enjoyed by all genders and has subsets that may cater specifically to some more than others. From bishoujo to erotic games.
Sometimes we want an eroge!
The point is that 1. A gyaruge is girl-centric and seems to need themes of fashion and kinda but not always romance. And 2nd, anyone can enjoy a gyaruge, with some even being tailored to certain demographics intentionally. So, is Final Fantasy X-2 a girls' game?
It depends upon what the meaning of the word
Gyaruge.
is.
I believe the answer is absolutely yes, and we don't have to do dissertation-level research exploring if it was a gyaruge of the retro bishoujo subtype or just intended for horny 13-year-old boys. It simply is a gyaruge, as we have described the term, and is playable and potentially enjoyable by all people. I personally thought the game was fun both when I was 13 and 33 years old. The story to me just did not click as an adult, but that does not take away from the legitimately fun battle mechanics or my ability to at least appreciate what they were going for in the story.
The power of love conquers all. So romantic. Count me in.
But the purpose of this video is to explore why it was not loved by everyone, and why the ratio of people who did or did not enjoy it differs when comparing American and Japanese audiences. Kawaii and idol culture were really coming into their own in 2003 Japan. This is almost exactly the middle of the Heisei era, and Japanese audiences would recognize the intro pop song as famous singer Korakumi singing a pop song idiosyncratic to early idol music and kawaii aesthetic that was prevalent in the country's cultural zeitgeist. Yeah, that's hard to say. Japanese audiences may not have liked the direction being taken with Yuna. Trust me, we are about to go into articles and comments surrounding that exact topic. But the aesthetic was at least something familiar. Some Americans thought it was cool for sure, but a lot of us in 2003 were faced with two gigantic hurdles where Japanese audiences only had to get over one. Americans in 2003 were facing character shock and culture shock. Final Fantasy X was an enormous success, and while it certainly had its moments, it was centered around the universal themes I described in the beginning. The shift in tone and shift in Yuna's character was most likely a double whammy of jarring that put a bad taste in people's mouths that I think has unfairly lingered to this very day. That was part 1. Time for part 2.
Youch.
Here's the problem with this dramatic shift. The seriousness and earnestness of the first game was in stark contrast to the happy-go-lucky nature of the second, apparently disenfranchising about half of the Japanese audience while estranging vast amounts of the American ones. 20 years later, Yahoo Japan, which is like the front page of the internet over there, had a piece on the 20th anniversary of Final Fantasy X-2, and the divide among players was very clearly split into two categories. One camp hated the skimpy girls frolicking around for Yuna's lost love while making ditzy comments.
Disasterific.
While the more invested described a clear sense of empowerment from Yuna, searching for Titus on her own terms after being recognized as a pop idol, globetrotter, and international sensation. Let's take a moment to look at the Famitsu article, as well as some of the comments. This is a loose translation of everything, but you can check out the description, right under the like button, if you are so inclined. March 13th was the 20th anniversary of Final Fantasy X-2, and Squaresoft's last project before being absorbed into Square Enix. The article starts by talking about Yuna having okuyukashisa in the first game. This term refers to a woman being modest or reserved, and does not carry the same negative connotations that calling a woman demure would here in the West. Remember, we are simply looking at cultural differences and how they may or may not have affected this game's reception. The author then contrasts Yuna having okuyukashisa in Final Fantasy X to this new Yuna of Final Fantasy X-2, saying that her hair, general fashion, and attitude are so different that it put off many players. He does go on to express that you can see her trying to break out of this new idol sphere hunter thing in the adventures of X-2, and how it is rather touching when we learn the motivations for her new persona and her way of interacting with the world of Spira. At the time, it was sensational that the three main characters were women, and the author of this article and his colleagues were simply shocked at the opening, especially the Sailor Moon-esque transformation sequence. The editorial department gathered around the monitor and rewatched the same scene over and over in some sort of stupefied disbelief. This isn't to say that it was all bad, however, just more of a shock when coming off the heels of Final Fantasy X. The article praises the great costume design and how switching your dress sphere with its accompanying transition in battle felt like watching a TV show, along with all the magic that visually accompanies our hero changing archetypes mid-fight. The feeling I got was mildly analogous to Tanjiro switching from his to the just a little more AKB48? Let's look at some of the comments now to see if we can glean any sort of consensus among Japanese audiences. I don't want to get bogged down in this section, so I'm going to kind of rapid fire through these. Our first commenter talks about how most people likely have not seen the real ending. This person also mentions how the gyaruge is tonally inconsistent. They feel that the game's true ending goes against the setting of the established world of Final Fantasy X, rendering both the first and second games pointless. However, in spite of all this, the commenter passionately feels that Yuna had such a hard journey in the first game, and that it's okay to just let her find happiness. Our second commenter loves Final Fantasy X and is absolutely in love with Yuna. He thinks she's the perfect girl and fell in love with Yuna through Tidus in Final Fantasy X. He thinks she's cute and wants to protect and save her because she's so strong and has so many powerful quotes.
Game over, man. Game over.
The point is that this person loves Yuna, and therefore loves Final Fantasy X too. Our third commenter loved the game. They really enjoyed the multiple endings as well. They understand that it's not as immediately lovable from people who just played Final Fantasy X, but they commend the game developers for changing the worldview and the game systems, despite that probably being a tough thing to do. And, as is becoming a theme, they are so happy for Yuna. Commenter number 4 thinks Final Fantasy X is a masterpiece, but a key part of that is that it was a tragedy, and the tragic nature of Final Fantasy X is what made the ending so impactful. They were looking forward to the sequel, but when Final Fantasy X-2 came out, they felt uncomfortable due to the style change and character change. However, they did feel like the true ending of X-2 connected well with the first game's ending, making the experience worth it. Our last commenter understands why there is division and actually rage quit and threw their controller at the wall when asked to do another stupid mini-quest, specifically the one about handing balloons out in town. However, after waiting a few years, they picked it back up and realized it was really quite fun, got really deep into the missions, and enjoyed it. So what kind of conclusions can we draw from all of this? Please keep in mind that whenever I refer to Westerners from here on out, I am specifically referring to those with only surface level exposure to Japan in 2003. Back then, these two video games, the first fully voice acted ones in the series, may have been some of our first and deepest dives into Japanese media. We have gone over how the magnitude of Final Fantasy X's popularity and influence simply may have led to more people being invested in its sequel, but disappointed in its direction, the cultural divide in 2003 regarding gyaruge and kawaii culture, as well as the Japanese audience's recollections in response to an article put out during the 20th anniversary of Final Fantasy X-2. But does all this truly justify X-2's warmer reception in Japan? I wholeheartedly believe that the cringe both cultures talk about regarding Final Fantasy X-2 is not the same cringe. Allow me to close by talking about something that I have not had the chance to personally elaborate on. Yuna. Yuna is Japan's second most loved Final Fantasy character, according to a poll of over 400,000 people by the Japanese broadcasting megagiant NHK. She is beloved by all who play these games, but incredibly so in Japan. Yuna's character in Final Fantasy X was so loved due to her determination to face her terrible fate rather than run from it. The West culturally values individualism, where East Asian countries tend to favor the collective. Yuna represents a selfless martyr who would give her life to stop sin, while we might gravitate towards Tidus, who fought his own non-existence, refused to accept that sin had to come back, and gave courage to his colleagues to embrace his non-conformist views. I cannot prove this, but I feel that a Western audience would see Tidus as the hero at the end of Final Fantasy X, while Japanese audiences initially saw Yuna as a hero from the moment we learned what was demanded of her. This was a cultural difference my wife and I discovered at the dinner table one night. At the time, I was rather shocked to hear that she echoed the same sentiment, while I had always understood Tidus to be the real hero. The Japanese empathize with Yuna on a deep cultural level, while we in the West might only be able to sympathize with her. I cannot stress this enough, as there is even a Shin Kabuki production of Final Fantasy X. I mean, just imagine if there was a Broadway production of Halo where Master Chief sings about single-handedly mowing down the swarm. As I mentioned before, trying to localize a girly romp through Spira into English forces American audiences to jump 2 gigantic hurdles, where Japanese audiences only need to get over 1. American audiences in 2003 were nowhere near as exposed to Japanese culture as today, and while Japanese audiences may have been stunned by the direction chosen, young American audiences may have been baffled by that direction's mere existence. While the game was critically well received, documented evidence of fan backlash and my general involvement in the Final Fantasy community since the mid-90s have shown that this game has such an interesting potential for discourse. However, a lot of the discussion among English speakers is sadly describing their negative experiences. Try giving this game another go, but this time through the lens of what we learned today. Final Fantasy X-2 is as flawed as it is fun.
'Cause people built it.
But remember that its drastic change in tone was intentional and a product of its culture and time. It may just surprise or charm you. After all, the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences recognized Riku for outstanding achievement in character performance back in the year 2004, so there's gotta be something there, right?
Oh, I know! The password is monkey!
And if not, and you're still cringed out by it, that's totally understandable too. I really want to thank all of you for watching this far, and would like to sincerely thank all 10 of my subscribers for participating in this video essay. I do this for fun, but a like, subscribe, and the act of sharing this video with someone you think would enjoy it would mean so very much to me.
And I'm grateful that you stayed with me until the end.
It's time for me to go home.
Now this is pod racing!
I think we party enough, don't you?
I'm a high-functioning alcoholic.
Brother! Faster!
This is my story. It'll be a good one.
Time for a pee.